Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like everyone has their name in there. We appreciate that. Welcome to those who are associated with the Chatfield Edge, and to those of who are new, we also welcome you. This is the second in a series of webinars that we're launching this year to support students who are pursuing additional education, not just from starting to apply to college or trade school or certificate program, but for those who may have recently graduated and are looking to move into the workforce. So last month, we launched Let's Chat's webinar with a time management focus. So we're learning to juggle priorities that from the onset can make a big impact in the long run. So a recording of that webinar is available on our website, chatfieldedge.org. Also, if you have ideas for future webinar topics, please add those to the chat so we can consider them. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. Our presentation will be about 30 minutes, and then we will open up with Q&A. While you're watching, please mute your microphone. Also, we will do interactive exercises, so be ready to participate. Finally, tonight's presenter is Carol Gross-McMahon, who comes to us from the Marketing Pact. This organization helps us shape our vision and reach the students and mentors who make up our organization. For years, Carol has been helping people write resumes that showcase their experience in education to prospective employers. We're grateful she is leading us tonight. And so, Carol, without further ado, I will turn the screen over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here. Resumes and job applications and interviews. It's something I'm really passionate about. And it's something that a lot of people just run from when they hear they need to do a resume or get ready for a job interview. But I find it's like one of those really exciting points in your life where you're ready to show off what you've learned, what experience you have. And really, building your resume is just one way to tell the world what you're made of and what you're ready to do. So, hopefully, by the end of tonight, you'll pick up some tips on how to create a resume. Even if you have one already, hopefully, you'll learn some things that will help you enhance your resume a little bit more. As Bob said, I'm with the Marketing Pack, and it's a local marketing agency that I founded, gosh, almost 9 years ago. I can't believe we're going to have our 10-year anniversary in just a year. So it's been really exciting for us, and the Chatfield Edge is one of our very favorite clients. And I don't say that to everyone, but they really are. But we love the mission that the Chatfield Edge stands for, and tonight is just one example of how they want to help those who are pursuing education or certifications reach their goals. So whatever your goal is, at some point that's going to translate into getting a job. So hopefully tonight will help. As Bob said, I have reviewed hundreds and hundreds of resumes over the years. Some of them have been for what I'd call C-level positions, so very senior executives in organizations, and they have just as much trouble starting the resume process as those who are just starting out in their career. So don't worry if you're unsure. Don't worry if you feel like it's, a big lift. We'll give you some tips to get through it together. So I want to start with what the purpose of a resume is. And it may sound really straightforward and obvious what a resume is, but I really break it down into a few points. Of course, it's a way for you to document and summarize all of your experience. And whether that experience is through jobs, through higher ed learning, through certifications, it's a way to put all of it in one place so that you can talk about it and a prospective employer can see what you're made of. So that's what people normally think of a resume as. It is a way to demonstrate that you are qualified beyond belief for whatever this job is that you're going for. And so a lot of the tips that we'll talk about are ways to really make those qualifications and the skills that you have pop out on your resume so that someone sees them and is interested in them. It's also a great way to highlight accomplishments and not just the things that you've done in a job, but the results maybe that you have helped your employer gain. And that can be anywhere from, we'll see some examples from, growing a client base or reducing turnover for a client. It really just depends on what the organization is about. It can also be awards that you've gotten or awards that you've helped your employer get. So highlighting your accomplishments is definitely a part of your resume. Really, when it comes down to it, it's a way without you being there in person with a prospective employer to tell them who you are and what you're made of. And it gives them a chance to kind of get to know you before they get to know you. And then, of course, it's one thing that creates a strong first impression. When you think about applying for a job, the very first thing that your potential employer sees is your resume. And so that first impression is so critical. It may seem unfair because there's a lot of people who say, but if they met me in person, they'd love me. Um, and that's true. But with so many job applicants out in the marketplace, the resume really is the very first step in an employer thinking about whether or not they want to talk to you. So that takes us to our very first quiz. And I'd like you to get ready to answer this. If you think about it, what is the most important function of a resume? The most important job your resume has to do. So, Bob, if you want to share the quiz, if everybody just answers, and then we'll go through the. For some reason, I can't see my mouse, so I can't answer the quiz. I'm going to touch my screen. Sorry if that's, there we go. It's the only way I can get rid of it. All right. Do we have the results in, Bob? All righty. Okay, so we're kind of split a little bit. The majority of people are saying the most important function of your resume is to get the interview, 83%. Right on. Now, your resume will help you in the other two areas. Certainly, it's one tool that's going to help you get a job. And certainly, it's a function of, being able to articulate your job experience. But the most important thing is to help you get past what we call the gatekeepers. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to you can close the little quiz on your screen if it's still there. All right. And there we go. So in helping you land the interview, we need to think about what's the process when a resume is submitted, when you send your resume in. Well, the first part of the process, unfortunately, is the screening process. And I like to call that beat the eliminator. The eliminator is the person or the process that's going to say you're in or you're out. And this little 7-second clock is there to remind us that that's about the average time that whoever is looking at your resume spends on it initially. 7 seconds. Think about that. That's like seeing a billboard on I-71 or I-75. It's actually a little bit longer than that. Billboards are about 3 to 4 seconds. But think about how quickly you go past a billboard when you're driving. You're scrolling through TikTok or Facebook or Reels or whatever. And it's about the amount of time you're willing to look at something before you decide, it's worth my time to watch that reel or it's not. So what happens after that 7 seconds is you get put in one of two piles, the consider pile or the eliminate pile. And the consider pile is, frankly, the person who is hiring or selecting people they want to interview is going to stick it in that pile and say, you know what, there might be something there. I'll take a closer look at that resume. And the eliminate pile are the resumes that immediately get tossed out. Now, if you get in the eliminate pile, you might find your way back into the process if everybody who's in the consider pile doesn't work out. But don't count on that. So your job is to make sure you get in that consider pile. And that leads to who is looking at the resumes these days. Well, when I was first starting out in my career about 100 years ago, it was a person. And it was usually a person in human resources, or it might have even been the manager who was going to hire the person. And that person looks at your resume, might actually read some of it, could have a piece of paper and maybe circle things that pique their interest about you or highlight things. And then they would have a physical process of deciding what to do next. That's still the case in a lot of companies, but a lot of bigger companies, especially, are using software to help them through that process because depending on the position, they're getting hundreds of resumes, and there's no way one person can effectively look through all of those. So there's new software out there uses AI technology that's called applicant tracking systems or an ATS. So an ATS is a system that looks at your resume and matches it against the job description, and it's looking for similarities between the two. And a lot of that is based on words that are in both documents. And if enough of those words match in the right order, then it can get put over into that consider pile for a human being to review. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but ATS trackers are becoming more and more prominent. And so we have to really think about the words that we use in our resumes. By the way, if you do have any questions, just shout them out. I can't see you all, so Bob, help me if anybody's raising their hand or anything. We can call on them. So let's take a look at the basic resume and some general guidelines for putting it together. You might have heard from parents or teachers or employers or friends or mentors, always keep that resume to one page. There's a lot of people who still subscribe to that. In fact, I do. Here's why. And it's tough to keep your resume to one page, especially as your career goes on and you get more experience. But the benefit of it is a couple fold. First of all, it's easier for either a human or a robot to review one page than it is 2 or 3 pages. Secondly, it's a really good exercise if you can keep your resume to one page. It's a really good way to think about, am I putting the most important information on this page? Because if you only have so much room, it helps you eliminate a lot of extra words or things that really might not be helping to tell the story of who you are. Does that mean you can never use 2 pages? Absolutely not. Again, especially as your career builds, or depending on the kind of field you're in, you may need another half page or that second page. I think medical credentials can tend to take up more space on a resume. So that may be a career field where, you know what, I just can't fit it all on one page. But being thoughtful about what goes on that first page is really, really important. Of course, you want everything on your resume to be really clear, professionally formatted. Whether you think Jocelyn Delgado's resume is all that and the most perfect one, I see a few flaws in it, but it's pretty good overall because I can see really clearly all of the sections in her resume. And if I want to see where she went to school, I go right to that education. If I want to see what some of her skills are, it's very clearly laid out. So using formatting to make things really clear and organized is super important. So a lot of people will write their resume, get it to exactly where they want it, and it's really good. And then they use that same resume for every single job they apply for. Sometimes that can work. But what I think a better way is to take your resume, look at the job description for what you're applying for right now, and change just a little bit of it here and there so that it matches the job. That's going to help you get through that eliminator because you're going to start matching some of the words from the job description and putting them into your resume. It doesn't mean you have to revamp the entire resume. What it means is a couple of sections. So perhaps your career objective changes just a little bit in its wording to match the job. Or you might look at your work experience section and move some of the bullets around a little bit so that they're the most important ones that relate to the job are at the top. So you can tailor your resume to fit whatever the job is at hand. The next thing I like to talk about is using strong action verbs. And we're going to have an exercise on that in just a minute. But using really strong words shows that you have authority, that you have courage, that you know what you're talking about, versus more passive words like helped or assisted in. They're fine. They tell someone what you did, but they're not as strong as words like led or tailored a program around. And again, we'll see some examples of that, but strong action verbs are really important in your resume. Above all, be truthful in your resume. Um, it's one thing to word something in a little more compelling manner, but to embellish the truth or put information on your resume that's not accurate, I always say you're going to get caught. And even if you don't get caught, you know inside whether or not you were truthful on your resume. There have been famous people, a lot of politicians, who have gotten caught not being truthful on not necessarily their resumes, but their bio information. So be truthful. It's who you are. It's part of your honor when you're coming into a job anyway. And then, this one goes at the top, middle, and bottom of the list, but proofread, proofread, proofread. The best proofreader of your resume is not you. It is someone who has never seen it before. So don't just rely on yourself to proof your resume. Make sure you give it to somebody who you know and trust to take a look at it before you send it anywhere. So I'm going to pause. Any questions so far from anybody? All righty. We'll just keep plowing through here. Oh, I'm sorry. One last one. Um, Again, Jocelyn's resume is well formatted. Again, we can pick it apart a little bit here and there, and we'll do that later. But it's pretty clear, formatted, and professional versus poor Catherine. She's trying so hard to be unique and out there with who she is. Something tells me Catherine's applying for like a graphic designer job or something in the arts. Um, there is a place to get really creative about yourself, but it's not in your resume. Too many colors, too many graphics, too many boxes and crazy pictures um, don't really paint a professional image of who you are. So you can use color, but don't go too far. And you can use your photo too on your resume, but don't go too far overboard. All right, so there are some mandatory sections in your resume that you definitely want to include. The first and one of the most important is how to get a hold of you. So, name, phone, address, etc. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I would really suggest you build one. And that's a whole nother webinar that we're thinking about doing is how to build an effective LinkedIn page. But if you do have one, go ahead and include that in there as well. So contact information, of course. And then what I like to see at the top of a resume is some kind of a summary that tells an employer what it is you're looking for or what kind of a job you think you really would be ideal about. And that's the section that you tailor to each of the jobs that you're applying for. So something that sums it up, not long. I'm not talking paragraphs long. I'm talking a sentence or two that really sums up who you are and what you're looking for. And then, of course, this is what most people think about on a resume. It's all your experience. We might call it job experience, but depending on where you are in your career, especially if you're just starting out, you might have paid jobs, you might have internships, you might have a combination of those. You might be going to school and not have time to work right now. And if that's the case, are you doing anything on campus in a leadership role? Maybe you're on the school newspaper. Maybe, do they do school newspapers anymore? I suppose they do. Um, Maybe you're in a club and you're the vice president of some club on campus. Those are experiences that you can also put on your resume if they show leadership and work qualities. Volunteer work can easily go in this section as well, but you want to focus on any of those experiences that show skills that you have and accomplishments. Speaking of skills, for some fields, having technical skills is really important. I'll give you another example with graphic design. Knowing the Adobe Illustrator platform is really important if you're going to be a graphic designer. We were talking earlier about someone going through the Chatfield Edge who has HVAC experience. So there may be some technical skills that somebody going into HVAC or plumbing has, whether it's a full-on certification or if it's a training program maybe that you've gone through. If it's relevant to the kind of job that you want or that you're looking for, it's important to list it in a skills section. Do you know a foreign language, for example? Do you know American Sign Language? These are great skills to have. Um, Somebody going into a medical career, it may not seem that exciting, it may seem trivial, but knowing CPR and being certified in CPR is something that you could put in this section. So it really depends on what field you're going in. And then, of course, education. I've had people ask me, do I still include my high school on my resume? It really depends on how old you are, to be honest with you, and what other education you've had since then. Um, but I will say this, in a city like Cincinnati, it is amazing how much we think about what high school we went to before anybody asks what college you went to. And so sometimes somebody seeing, your high school on your resume, they may know someone who went there. They might have gone there. So I wouldn't necessarily eliminate it. But of course, the higher education and certification programs and things like that are extremely important to include. And then kind of a final note on education. It used to be when I was applying for jobs that your GPA had to be on your resume. That's not really that mandatory anymore, but I would say if you have a strong one, why not show it off? If an employer requires your GPA, they'll ask for it. So don't feel like you have to put it on there if it's not something that you think will promote you in the best light. But if it is, by all means, put it on there. All right, so these are the key sections, the 5 key sections. So how in the world do you get started on writing your resume? Well, I like to say you have to focus on your words inward first. And that second word is referring to Microsoft Word or whatever document platform of your choice. But focus just on what you want to say. Don't start by trying to format it and get all of the blocks together that you saw Jocelyn had, because you'll spend so much more time worrying about fonts and formatting and not enough time on your words. If you get it all in a Word document first, you can always go back and work then on how do I want this to look. But the words are so important. So what I would do is I'd go back a slide and I'd list those 5 sections in a Word document. Contact info, leave a blank space. Don't try to fill it all in right away. Summary statement, experience, skills, and education. Then go back and just start jotting down anything you can think of that applies to those sections. Don't worry about how it reads right now. Don't worry if it's 100% complete. Just jot things down so you don't forget. And again, don't worry about formatting this early on. Now you go back to each of those sections in whatever order you're comfortable and you start refining what you wrote down. You start adding in the details. You start thinking about those bullet points and what order do I want to talk about things in. I'm still not formatting beyond bullet points right now. And this is a tough one, especially the older you get in your career. If you haven't kept up with your resume, it's hard to remember what was my job title in that job that I had 10 years ago, and when did I work there? So now's the time to start looking for some of that. The benefit if you have a LinkedIn profile and you keep up with it, it's an easy cheat sheet for you to go back and remember where you worked when and what your titles were. So you can kind of see we're starting with almost a blank sheet, filling in scant information, then we're getting a lot more detailed as we go on. I spoke about it, and again, that quiz is coming up in a second, but action words, action words. So when you write those bullets, make sure they're really strong, and we'll go through some examples. And now I have to pause for a moment and talk about AI. um, So I'm sure a lot of you have used or dabbled in ChatGPT or any of the other AI tools that are out there. And you could type into ChatGPT, um, I am pursuing careers as a medical assistant, and I have worked at the following places with these jobs, and this is where I went to school, and a few other details. Give me a resume. You could do that. And if you've used AI tools, it's shocking what it can come back with. It could almost be finished, right? I would caution against that for a couple of reasons. What AI feeds back is only what it knows. And so it can tend to fill in blanks that maybe aren't accurate or aren't necessary. And so you can kind of be fooled a little bit by AI and think, wow, this is a great resume and I'm finished and it only took 5 minutes. Be careful. The other reason to use AI really sparingly is a lot of those eliminator software detectors that I talked about at the beginning can can tell if a resume has been generated by AI. I don't know how, but I know they can. And so they're looking for AI signals to know whether or not somebody actually wrote their resume. And so you don't want that to be the reason that you got eliminated. Can you use AI if you get stuck on something, on how to word something? Absolutely. I use it every day. But then I take what AI said and then I look at it and say, okay, what if this makes sense for what I'm writing today? So it's a good tool, but please don't let your whole resume be written by AI. And finally, kind of like the proofreading, once you've got everything in the Word document, remember, we're not even formatting yet. Run all of that by somebody you know and trust. It's really good if you can do that in person. Say your mentor, if you've got a mentor through Chatfield Edge, or a professor or a coworker. Sit down with somebody, give them your Word document, and see what they think. See what questions they have about your experience. And they may help you fill in blanks that you don't even realize are in there. So definitely it's not a job you should do totally on your own. All right, so we've talked a lot about active and passive words. So now it's time to take a quiz. So Bob's going to bring up a quiz, and we want to just go through and decide, is this word active, action-oriented, or is it passive? So Bob, if you can find that quiz. There we go. And you may have to scroll through the quiz on your sidebar to see all of the questions. So there are 6 total. So make sure you scroll through so you get all 6. And we'll just take a minute. We'll give it another maybe 20 seconds and then we'll pull up the results. I will say AI is good if you are looking for strong words. You can say, here's what I want to say. Is there an action word or an active word I can use instead? So it is good for that. But again, take it with a grain of salt. All right, Bob, does it look like everybody's in? All right, so we'll go through these. I don't know if you all can see the first one or if you have to scroll on your own, but the first one helped. So again, a mixed bag. Most people thought that was a passive word. Some said it was an active. So we're going to call that one a passive word. So if I helped, maybe I didn't lead. So that's kind of the difference between active and passive in that case. Doesn't mean it's a bad word to use on your resume and you can't use it, because if you helped, you helped. But if there's a stronger word that you can use, definitely choose that. 100% right on the next one. Managed. The word managed is you can even hear it phonetically. It's a strong word, but managed means in control. It doesn't necessarily mean you managed a whole department, but if you managed a piece of a project at your employer, managed is a great word to use. Assisted with. Again, nothing wrong with it, but it's not as strong as you did it. Now, I talked earlier about being truthful on your resume. So, if you weren't the project manager or the person who owned the project, it's okay to say that you assisted or helped. But if there's an opportunity to use a stronger word, definitely go for it. Designed, again, 100% strong word. And then worked on, well, it means you did some of it, but not all of it. And that may be the case, but it's not as strong as some of the other words here. And then the final one, created, really strong word. You owned it, you created it, you did it. So, active and passive words, it takes practice to write that way. But that's also why it's helpful to have somebody sitting with you to help you think of how could I say this stronger. So speaking of how could I say this stronger, here's another exercise. We're going to do this one together. If anybody wants to chime in, you can talk about this. But here is here is our lovely lady who works as a hostess at IHOP, and this is really the only job that she's had. And she's finishing her degree, and she's putting her resume out there. But her hostess experience is what she has to offer on her resume right now. So one of the bullets in her resume certainly could be that she checked in guests and seated them. It's short, it's to the point, it tells you exactly what she did. I like I like short and to the point a lot, especially on a resume. But is there a way that we could say that a little stronger? So I'm going to kind of open up the channels here. Does anybody have any ideas on how you can maybe say that a little stronger? Can you guys see the answer up there? I can see it on my screen. Hopefully you can't. All right, we got a shy group, but I'm gonna keep going here. So maybe a stronger way to say that she checked in and seated guests is she welcomed guests, she managed the reservations and the wait lists, because if you ever worked in a restaurant, you know that's a big deal. She seated diners and ensured they had a pleasant dining experience. And that really tells more about a relationship that she built with her customers rather than just checked them in, seated them, checked them in, seated them. She built a relationship with her guests and made them feel good. And an employer reading that will assume that she could do that for them as well. All right, let's do another one. So here's our Kroger cashier gentleman, and he is looking to leave Kroger or move up the Kroger ladder a little bit. So on his resume, the truthful statement, he handled cash register and checkout duties. Nothing wrong with that. It's what he did. But maybe a stronger way to say it would be that he operated the point of sale system. And if you've ever been in retail of any kind, you know a POS system is something that people talk about. So he operated the point of sale system. He processed customer payments accurately, good word, and he provided excellent customer service. Again, we're talking about how he handled customers, not just duties. And again, what an employer is going to do is say, wow, I want him working for me because he's going to treat our customers the same way, or our patients, or our constituents, or wherever he's applying for a job. All right, I'm going to do one more. The marketing pack. This happens to be someone who is on our team. His name is Jack Burke, and that's really him. And he started as a social media intern. And his job was he was responsible for managing social media. Remember, that's just one bullet under his internship section. Nothing wrong with it, tells what he did. But a stronger way to say that might be he created, let's break it down into what he actually did. He created, strong action word, and scheduled social media posts that increased the student organization's Instagram followers by 40% in 6 months. So that's some data to digest, right? Um, you won't be lucky enough to get results data like that with every job that you have. But when you're in a job, I really encourage you to listen as you're working on projects or whatever your responsibilities are. And if you start seeing or hearing the impact that you or even your department is making on the business, jot those down. I literally have a Word document that I used to keep open when I was earlier in my career, and I would just jot things down in it to remember next time I update my resume, I'm going to pull out some of these nuggets. So having data and results in your resume is, wow, really, really impactful. Volunteer work. Some people say, oh, you shouldn't put any volunteer work on your resume, only paid work. Well, frankly, it might be the only experience you have at that given time. Or maybe it's the most relevant experience you have. Maybe everything else on your resume has been, working at IHOP or, at Kroger, but you volunteered for the American Heart Association and you want to go into the healthcare field. Well, that experience is going to go a long way in showing a prospective healthcare employer that you get the industry. You want to be in the industry. The other thing about volunteer work, whether it's on your resume or not, it's just something that helps build character. And if you're part of the Chatfield Edge, we have a tenant called servant leaders. And it's really a call to action to say, hey, how can you give of yourself beyond yourself and give to others? As somebody who's reviewed tons of resumes, when I don't necessarily notice the absence of volunteer work, but I notice when it's on a resume. And I look at some of the organizations and I think, wow, that's cool. They're not only, hauling water, going to school and working, but they're finding time to give back. And it really shows who you are and kind of another dimension. And bonus if you can volunteer doing something in the field that you want to go into professionally. All right, so does anybody have any opinion on what's good and what's maybe could be improved on Patrick Holland's resume? There are some good things here. Does anybody feel like chiming in with any ideas on what you like or don't like about Patrick's resume?
I think the graph is, while it visually is interesting, it's problematic because it's not grounded in anything. Like fast typing skills, 35.7%. What does that mean? Right? It's not how many words per minute. So it's not specific enough if I were an employer looking at that for me to know, oh, this is a really great typer. This is what I want.
Gotcha.
I don't think the interest section, it's a third of the one-page resume. And while certainly it might relate to the position he's applying for, volunteer service would be more impactful.
That's a great point because like you said, it does take up a lot of real estate on that resume.
I'd also like to see his experience and his education be separated. It just says my experience, and then I see a bunch of dots.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not sure where to look on his resume because there's just so much going on.
Mm-hmm. I think also to kind of to that point, when I look at it, it makes me wonder, does he really have any experience? Because it's all about icons and graphics, and while I'm a fan of fewer words is better, there's almost too few words in this whole resume. Um, all right. How about this one? Any comments on Maya's resume? There's things I like and don't like about it. I
Do
will
like
say,
that her information is kind of it's all here at the top. So her email, her home phone, her cell phone, I mean, where she's at, everything is kind of clumped together, if you will, put
Mhm.
in that one area. And it seems very laid out, I
Mhm.
guess, where you can go skills, like you said, work history. It's just what's her education? Bang, you can look right at it. You don't have to kind of search through all the whole resume to even get to that point.
And while I'm not necessarily a fan of that particular shade of yellow because it feels kind of weak and maybe, not as strong as it could be, it really does help guide you, and you can zero in on those sections. Yep. Anything else about this one?
I'm going to be careful because it looks like my resume, but um, there's a
These aren't
lot
all
of
bad ones.
stuff to read. And as I look at that, I almost wish it were a little bit less.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. I think maybe one thing that's playing against her is there's not a lot of space between where one
Mhm.
bulleted list ends and the next one begins. So it can
Right.
kind of all blend together.
It just feels dense to me.
So she has the opposite problem as Patrick. Okay. But I will say this, it's at least, I think those section breaks kind of help guide you through the information. All right, Margarita. I don't know. I think she's going for another graphic design job, or she's an influencer or something. Not quite as bad as Patrick's, but she's got a little bit more experience. Again, I think, the colors and, there's just a lot visually going on. It's one thing to be interesting with a color or two. Clearly the photo too. Unprofessional. Um, Now, of course, this is an over-the-top example. Would somebody really do that? But you never know. I've seen some crazy LinkedIn profile pictures that I wouldn't think anybody would ever put on theirs, but they do. She
I
does
liked
do
her
it in,
presentation, but I didn't like the picture. That was the first thing that caught me is like, what's going on with the picture and what kind of person am I looking
yep.
at here?
I think it's interesting up here. What I like is that right up top, she does say who she is. She's a graphic
Hmm.
designer. And so that's like, bam, that's her stamp, and she's putting it out there.
Yeah.
So I like that. Um, whether or not all the visuals, not so much. She does an interesting thing of numbering each of the sections in her resume. I'm not sure really what the use of them is, but at least there are sections that you can follow. It's just a lot. It's a lot visually with all of the lines and the graphics and the colors. All right, how about Pamela Evans? Any
I
comments?
used to use that one and I don't like it anymore.
Me too.
I did too.
This is what they all looked like in the
It's
90s.
just too jumbled up. It doesn't really, it's too hard to discern what they're trying to tell you.
Yep.
So yeah, I abandoned that one years ago.
I think a challenge with this one is the font itself too. A lot
Yeah.
of the a more contemporary sans serif font is a lot easier to read. So I don't feel like I'm reading a book. Um, these dots too, after I used to do this back in the, late 80s, early 90s, you'd have these dots that would go across
Yeah.
and, 9 times out of 10, they would cause you to not line things up on the right-hand side.
Hmm.
Um, Now, to her credit, she's got her profile, experience, education, so we kind of know where we are. Um, and she has um, she has some good ideas on how to present the company name and then the position right after it. So if I only looked at those, I could see she's a translator for a private contractor. Um, she was a founder of this children's learning center. But there's just so much else going on and it's pretty dense. It's a little boring. So I would strive for at least some colors on the headers, something to break it up.
Hmm.
Okay, so that leads us to formatting tips, and we're almost finished here. We just saw a bunch of resumes. I'm gonna kind of park Jordan's over here. Not that it's perfect, but it's kind of clean, it's organized, um, and it does show that, font consistency, spacing, headers, it all matters in how you present the information. Jordan's a little artsy up at the top with his or her name in the box, so that's cool. Bullets, again, we saw that in almost all the examples. Easy to read as long as there's space between them. Don't want templates that are too cluttered. We just saw examples of some of those. And then this is really important. Before you send your resume, save it as a PDF. The reason you want to send a PDF versus a Word document is if any of the fonts that you chose aren't compatible with whoever's reading it, all of that time you spent formatting and making things line up and look perfect can go out the window because it can look very jumbled on their side. So always save as a PDF before you send it. And then make sure, because you remember, you've been working on this resume for quite a long time, maybe 12 versions of it. Make sure that that final file name, there is nothing more frustrating than when I get a resume and it just says resume V12. I'm like, whose resume? Because the first thing I do is if it passes the eliminator, I want to save it in a folder. So I need to see resume Jordan Smith 2025 so that I know who it is when I'm ready to contact Jordan. That's an easy one to forget. People do it all the time. And finally, tailoring your job to the resume. Tailoring your resume to the job. We've already talked about this a lot, but again, pull out that job description. Your resume might be finished already, but pull it out. Try to find some words in the job description that you can layer into your resume to get you past that eliminator. And then look at the top 3 things that they're looking for in that job and make sure those are near the top of your experience, whether it's in that summary statement at the top, that's the best place to put it. Or you might even want to flip some of the bullet points in your position descriptions and put something that they're asking for at the top of your list. Common mistakes, kind of the opposite of what we've been talking about. Typos, bad formatting, listing everything you've ever done in your life. You really have to be choiceful, and that's where that 1-page rule comes into play. And then this is another one people forget. It's time to give up that old Foxy Girl Gmail address and trade it in. You might still use that with your friends, but trade it in for something professional. Even if it's still a free Gmail account, make sure you've got a respectable email address that you want people to see. So the final thing is just really what your resume should do is say, why should this prospective employer interview me over anybody else? And if your resume is strong, it will help answer that question and get you that interview. So that's what we've got. I will open up the floor if there are any questions at all. And again, I'm going to leave Jordan's resume up there just as kind of a good visual.
One
And
thing that references, is that an automatic? I know it was in my earlier years, let's put it that way. But now some say don't add references, some say add your business references. I guess what are your thoughts on references on a resume?
that's a great question. I think it's still one of those things that some people include, some people don't include. Here's what I don't like. I don't like when it says references available upon request. Just don't even mention references if you're not going to include them. Because available upon request just sounds like you're trying to hide something, in my opinion. So either don't include them or include them, but not that middle line. I typically will include them if I know something about the person who I might be interviewing with, because then if I do, I will handpick people who I think they might know or might resonate with them. But if I'm not sure, I tend to leave them off until they're asked for because I want to get a little more insight on the job. And references are one of those things where have your standard list of 8 people who you know and you've asked, may I use you on my resume or for a job, if the opportunity arises. Have their information ready because it's probably going to come up at some point. But I don't know that it's necessarily mandatory. What is mandatory, in my opinion, is if you are going to use a reference and, an employer has asked for it, I always send my most current resume, and a link to the job description to my reference so that they know how to help sell me. And so they're not surprised when they get a call too. Does that help? Any other questions? All right. Well, we will have a recording of this session. So if you want to go back through it and re-review some pieces and parts of it, you're welcome to. If anybody on this call, I always just like to offer this. If anybody on this call is working on their resume and you want to send it to me, you are welcome to do that. I love looking at resumes. It's just sort of a weird passion of mine. But I also like helping people out. So if anybody wants to, I should have put my email address up on the screen, but it's Carol, Carol, at, and then it's the abbreviation for the word marketing, mktgpack.com. So Carol at mktgpack.com, marketingpack.com. Thank you, Alex, for putting that in the window. And I appreciate everybody's time tonight.
Well, thanks, Carol, and thanks everyone for participating in our quizzes. We will have a recording of the webinar posted on our social media, and a link will be emailed to you. So please share this with your family, friends, and coworkers who are unable to be with us tonight. Help them to get to know the Chatfield Edge. And if you are new to the Chatfield Edge and want to learn more about us, please contact me directly. My email address is robert.elmore@chatfieldedge.org. And my phone number is 513-875-3955. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and best of luck for your resume prep.
Awesome. Good night, everybody.
Good night.